thank you for joining us for our third budget listening session for fiscal year 2024. This serves as an opportunity for city staff to really hear from you, our residents and members of our community. So during this listening session, our goal is to collect your feedback, and we'll be here to answer any questions that you may have live. If there's anything that we can't answer, then we will do some research and post it on our strategy and budget website under the link for budget development. So before we get started, I just want to go over a couple of housekeeping items. We will have a quick presentation from our budget director, Ryan Bergman. We'll then move into an open discussion time. During that open discussion, you're able to raise your virtual hand and you'll be called on, and you can turn off your camera and you will be able to ask your question directly. If you would prefer not to be on camera, you can just drop your question in one of the chats or in our Q&A window. So I would like to take a moment and have everyone to introduce themselves, and we'll start with Ms. Smith.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Debbie Smith, Charlotte Department of Transportation.
Good evening. Matt Hassett, City Treasurer, Finance Department.
Ryan Bergman, Budget Director.
Tiffany Blackwell, Strategy and Budget.
Cherry Smith, Strategy and Budget.
Ethan Smith, Strategy and Budget.
Marie Harris, Strategy and Budget.
So now we'll turn it over to our Budget Director, Ryan Bergman, for a presentation.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about how the city's current budget is structured, and then we will use most of the time to allow you to ask questions, but also provide any feedback that you would like. All of the feedback that we collect, including this session, will be created into a budget engagement document that is then included with the city manager's recommended budget to City Council. So talking a little bit about the services that we provide and how they're paid for. If you live in Charlotte, you have one property tax bill, but that property tax bill helps fund both county services and city services. So the county receives about 64% of the property tax bill. The city receives 36%. So what the county provides is typically thought of as more of the soft, human-based services, such as education, social services, public health, whereas with the city, what we provide are more of the public safety and infrastructure services that you see on the screen. If you look at where the majority of your funds go from your property tax bill, the biggest city and county programs are included on the right. The majority of funds that are received by property taxes are used for CMS local support, but the funds that come to the city are primarily used for public safety services. So this digs a little bit deeper into the property tax dollars that the city gets. What we do is a little under 80% of our funds go towards the general fund. And so think of that as your annual year-to-year consistent services, such as paying a solid waste worker or paying a firefighter or a police officer, and also the typical equipment and services that they would need. We also set aside a little over 20% of the funds we receive for our capital program. So these are the hard infrastructure-based things that we do, such as roads, sidewalks, affordable housing. If you look on the pie chart on the right, this is intended to try to capture all of those dollars and where it goes within the city. You'll see police and fire are a big chunk of this, but you'll also see transportation and housing aren't very big pieces of the pie. That's because both entities are primarily funded by our capital investment plan. So the big chunk that's pulled out for capital support, those are funds that almost entirely go towards transportation needs and affordable housing. So as I mentioned, police and fire do make up the biggest portions of the general fund budget, answering more than 500,000 911 calls each year. The reason that police and fire receive more funds is because they are very staffing intense. And what I mean by that is, unlike many of our other services, police and fire have to operate 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. That means just to have one firefighter in one part of the city in one station at all times, you actually need 3 or 4 firefighters. For a police officer, you actually need 5 police officers just to always have one working in any specific part of the city. So digging a little bit deeper into how the city's budget is organized, as I mentioned, your property tax dollars primarily pay for the general fund and our capital investment plan. You can see on the screen digging a little bit deeper into what departments make up the general fund. But if you look on the right, the city is also responsible for a number of organizations that are funded by dollars that are not property tax dollars. So Charlotte Water and Charlotte Stormwater are supported by a monthly fee on all users of the system. In the case of Charlotte Water, that extends well beyond the boundaries of the city of Charlotte itself. As far as CATS, which is our transit system, that supports all of Mecklenburg County, and it is funded by both federal dollars, fares, but also primarily by a dedicated half-cent sales tax on all sales within Mecklenburg County. And then finally, our other enterprise fund is aviation, which is the Charlotte Airport, one of the bigger airports in the country. And that is funded entirely by business and user fees from people that use the airport. If as a Charlotte resident, if you don't use the Charlotte Airport, you're not funding its operations in any way. Finally, special revenue funds. This is where we put programs or expenses that are required to be spent on a certain thing. Examples would be grants. If we receive funding from the federal government to do a specific thing, it's likely to go there. But then also, one of our most common uses of these funds are called hospitality funds. So these are funds that, by the state, can legally only be used for things that boost tourism in the area. So they're funded by meals tax and they're funded by hotel taxes. So we can only use them to boost tourism. So some of the things that we would do primarily would be professional sports, such as the Charlotte Hornets. And as I mentioned, those funds cannot be used for any other reason. So here's another look at property and sales tax, and we should post this presentation because I know I move a little bit fast through it. But this gives you another look at the dollars of both property and sales tax, the amount that goes to the general fund, and then the amount that goes to our CIP, which is our capital investment plan. So speaking about the capital investment plan, the way that we do things in Charlotte is every 2 years we have a bond referendum that we send to the voters on a plan to take out debt for specific housing, transportation, and neighborhood projects. So in November of 2022, the voters approved $226 million worth of projects. We only received that funding a few months ago. We are just getting started on those projects. The budget that we are currently developing for next year is actually an off year in the bond cycle. So our major investments in housing and transportation are essentially made every 2 years, and this upcoming budget is not one of them. So we do plan ahead, though. Even though this next year is not going to be a bond year, we are consistently working with City Council on a 5-year strategy and plan for our capital program. So even though it's not a bond year, you will hear a lot of discussions around the next bond, which is in calendar year 2024. So when we're building an annual budget, there's a number of steps. These are the internal staff-based steps. We're trying to use economic data to project what revenue we will get from our current tax base, property taxes, sales taxes, and then revenue we'll get from fees. And then we identify what the cost increases are going to be to provide that current level of service. We are consistently trying to seek out efficiencies where we're able to provide the same amount of services at less dollars. And then finally, we also consider increases and reductions to the service levels that we provide. And when we're developing our budget, Charlotte is a AAA bond-rated city. That is the highest that it can be. It's also not something that is a guarantee for big cities. Out of our 20 peer cities across the country, only 6 are AAA, so that's something we're very proud of. And some of the ways we do it is we fully fund our reserves, we make sure that we don't spend all of our future capital capacity, and we make sure that every year our ongoing revenue is matched by ongoing expenses. So what that means is we're not using one-time cash that we have in fund balance to spend on something that is ongoing, like a police officer or a firefighter. So everything we do as the City of Charlotte, staff, budget staff, and the rest of the staff is to present a proposed budget to City Council. So when we're making funding recommendations, we are not making the recommendations based on personal opinions. We are making recommendations that we feel are what our current City Council wants because they are the elected representatives of the people. At the same time, City Council gives us key priorities and initiatives for us to be thinking about as we develop the budget. So you can see the City Council priorities on the left, but then we have some examples of other key initiatives that have been going on with this current City Council and the City Council prior to it. Affordable housing, corridors of opportunity, Hire Charlotte, which is really about matching up the jobs in Charlotte to the people in Charlotte, including workforce development, mobility strategies, and then 2 that were added at our most recent City Council retreat, which include closing the digital divide and also continuing to develop small businesses and minority-owned businesses. So one of the challenges as we work on this budget is, just like everyone at home, we are experiencing inflation in the cost for us to run our services. So what this chart does is it shows 20 years of history on what's called the Municipal Cost Index, which is how much it costs to provide city services. You can see that historically, the city would be facing between 2 to 3% each year. But over the last 2 years, just like everywhere else in the country, we have been experiencing some fairly extreme cost pressures on the services that we provide. And then finally, one of the things that we evaluate ourselves on as a city and as a city budget office is how we are doing compared to our peers in North Carolina. So out of all of the cities in North Carolina that have more than 75,000 people, Charlotte currently has the second lowest city tax rate. It's the lowest for the cities that are over 250,000 people as well. And then of those same cities, Charlotte is the only city that has not raised property taxes over the last 4 years, which is something that we're proud to have accomplished while still trying to meet the needs of the public and of the City Council. And then taking it one step further, what this tries to do is it tries to capture all local government costs that someone would be paying for, not just city. So that includes city property taxes, county property taxes, sales tax, water bills, stormwater bills, fees for your vehicle. And we're trying to compare it to those same cities. And the overall burden in Charlotte is the lowest among cities over 250,000, but it's also the third lowest of cities over 75,000. So the budget development process, as I mentioned, what we're working on is the City Council's, the budget that we recommend to the City Council. After we make the recommended budget on May 1st, City Council will be the deciders of evaluating, making changes, and then finally approving their budget in June. So we have one budget workshop with City Council left, and then after that will be the proposed budget and then a budget public hearing where we invite everybody to come in and speak on the budget. So we really invite everybody to stay connected and engaged. If you haven't taken our budget community input survey, please do so. We have around 1,000 responses so far, and we'd love to get it higher. We have a balancing act simulation tool so that you can be put in our shoes and show us what you would do. And then we also have a strategy and budget email where you can send in your comments, your opinion on the budget, and we can include in the public engagement packet that we give to City Council. So thank you for that, and I will turn it back over.
Before you get off, we had one on the presentation, a question from Ms. Maddie. Can you click back?
Which slide?
I think it was 11 maybe. It's with the pies and about the all other 123.5 million. But anyway, she was saying, can you explain the all other at 123?
Oh, sure. Yeah, and so this is just extrapolated from our adopted FY23 budget, which is online. So basically, those are just a collection of many different programs that aren't big enough to be an entire slice. Much of it is based on central services that we do, and then some of the other smaller departments that are added in, like community relations and communications and internal audit. And then it's also some of our other things that we do that aren't really based on a department, such as we do contribute to some nonprofit financial partners for certain services. Those are really the big drivers there.
Her second part of that was how would it work to be able to reallocate potentially part of that into like housing and neighborhood services? How would that process work?
Well, City Council makes the decision on the allocations every year, so they would need to make that decision. They would, of course, need to make a recommendation a little deeper than the all other operating programs. It would be at a much deeper level. It's just it would be a lot of much smaller slices that they would be looking in rather than one block slice. It was just visually shown this way. But as I mentioned, the best way to look at the general fund specifically is in the budget book. There's a list of all of the departments and their FY23 budget allocation.
All right, thank you so very much for that presentation, Ryan. For all that are listening in right now, you have the opportunity, just like Ms. Maddie did, to drop a question in the question and answer box, or you can raise your virtual hand and we will be able to unmute you and you can ask your question. Or if you happen to be listening in on Facebook, you can leave your comments there. We have those being monitored and we will be able to ask those questions as well.
Great. We have a couple questions we've already gotten in, but before we get started, we also wanted to introduce Tracy Dodson, who is also on the line. Tracy, do you want to say hello really quickly?
Hi, everyone. I can start my video now, too. Good evening. Thanks for including me.
All right, great. Thank you so much for being here. The first question we have is, why is there an unused middle lane on 74 West when the traffic volume continues to increase?
Hi, Tiffany. Debbie Smith here. Let me take that question. And so it hasn't always been an unused middle lane. It is a bus transit only lane. And during the time when the streetcar was built and the changes to Hawthorne Bridge were completed, that lane had to close in order to complete the construction. Since that time, CATS is working very closely with the North Carolina Department of Transportation in order to inspect and review that portion of the roadway in order to be able to reopen it for bus-only use.
Thank you so much. similar question about traffic, I guess, in general. How is the city investing dollars to help alleviate traffic congestion across the city?
Well, Tiffany, let's stay in the Department of Transportation shop for a little while. So we address traffic congestion in a multitude of ways. One is, building complete streets. We're always looking for an opportunity to prioritize and build additional turn lanes and complete streets. We also have a fantastic investment through the capital improvement program for something called our intelligent transportation system. And really what that is, it relates to building a smart system of integrated traffic signals with fiber optic cables and traffic management cameras. And that historically has been funded at about $4 million every bond cycle. So that, in addition to, we have a congestion mitigation capital improvement program, and that right now has been funded at about $10 million every bond. So with that investment, those are in strategic areas, South Charlotte, Steel Creek, and the University area. So that's some of the ways we're alleviating congestion.
Thank you. That's super helpful. I have Juan Yuvan. Would you like to turn on your camera and make some comments?
I'm just going to unmute myself.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions. The first one has to do with sidewalks. So in the Charlotte CLT app, you're able to request a sidewalk, and it usually goes to some department, and that department is going to say, the sidewalk you're interested in, it's not in some list, and I have never been able to get access to this list as to what are the priorities for sidewalks. Is my understanding that sidewalks it's a public private partnership where if a developer wants to put up a development, he has to put up a sidewalk, right? I live in the university area. I am about a mile away from a greenway, but I cannot access it because via foot because I have to traverse through sidewalks and streets at the same time, and it's quite hazardous, and the lighting is poor. And what my neighbors are doing to access the greenway is actually drive all the way up to the greenway and then use it, which kind of defeats the purpose of the greenway. And my second question / comment has to do with water, right? So I see that a lot of development is going up everywhere in Charlotte. And I saw the budget, the numbers look okay. I haven't had a chance to look at them thoroughly. But one thing that concerns me is water. And, when these budgets are going up, or maybe this is not the right department, is anybody considering the amount of water that we're consuming? And do we have sufficient water to support all of these developments that are going up throughout the city? And I'll go on mute now.
Yeah. Hi, Juan. Thanks so much for your question. Debbie Smith here with CDOT. I'd love to address at least your sidewalk question, which is sidewalks have been made a priority for our arterial streets or our thoroughfare streets, and so there is funding through the capital improvement program, and we prioritize those that new construction of sidewalk with safety in mind, particularly, as well as connections to greenways and to schools, but the priority is on thoroughfare sidewalks. But Juan, if you would provide me with your street name, I'd love to be able to follow up with you offline from this conversation, see if we can get you more details on that.
Yes, Senator Royal Drive, and the other one is going to be David Taylor Drive. So on Senator Royal Drive, there's at least 2 developments that are going on simultaneously, right? And before we were able to walk on either side of the road because there was woods, but because there are 2 developments going on simultaneously at the corner of Senator Royal Drive and West Mallard Creek Church Road, right? So currently, with people that run or want to walk through the greenway, actually have to walk in the streets, and there's not a safe place for anybody to walk on if they want to go to the greenway. That's just by the way.
Thank you. I appreciate that location.
And I'll get to the water question in a second. One thing that I would add about sidewalks in Charlotte is prior to around the mid-90s, a developer that built subdivisions in Charlotte was not required to build any sidewalks on them. So that is where the historical problem in Charlotte comes from. City Council back in the 90s did fix this by requiring sidewalks on developments within city limits at this point. But we're left with the legacy of many neighborhoods, thoroughfares that didn't have sidewalks, which is extremely, extremely costly to reconcile. And when I say extremely costly, I mean well into billions. What the city has done is it has expanded investment in that area over the last couple of bond cycles. Prior to this most recent bond, the city would put in 15 or 20 million in to build new sidewalk connections on our thoroughfares. We did increase that to 50 million in this most recent bond, but as mentioned, it is a very big list from that historic lack of sidewalks from prior to the 90s.
Okay, and for the uninitiated, sorry to interrupt, but for the uninitiated, I keep hearing the term thoroughfares. What does that mean? Because I'm not a civil engineer, and I obviously don't work for the city.
No, I appreciate the question on that one. So when I say thoroughfare or when I say arterial street, I just mean a higher speed, higher volume road, as opposed to, say, a local neighborhood street. And so appreciate that. Senator Royal and David Taylor, happy to get you more details on that situation out there. And thank you, Ryan, for that expansion.
We also know that we're going to also look into that automated response you got on the app. So we'll also check on that piece as well. The communications team just let me know that piece as well.
2/3 of their revenue is used for capital costs, so fixing the pipes and building new pipes, and a big percentage of that is used for what they call capacity for growth. And so what that is trying to track the future of utilization of water and usage throughout the community to make sure that the projects can line up that capacity before it gets there. So the cost that Charlotte Water is legally allowed to charge developers, they do so, but it all fits together. Charlotte Water has to always maintain their own infrastructure, but they also have to be ready to expand to meet future needs.
Go ahead. Okay, I'll get to those and then I have one more. Can you explain how the money for tourism works?
Thank you, Tiffany. So this is Matt Hassett with City Treasurer for Finance. As Ryan had mentioned earlier, these are what we would call our special revenue funds. So by state statute, it is restricted on how the funds can be used. So it will specify exactly what type of projects or uses of these funds, and primarily they are either going to be used for marketing to increase future tourism opportunities or to help construct tourist drawing activities such as the Spectrum Center Arena, cultural arts such as the Mint Museum, Beckler Museum. We can use some at the Convention Center as well as Bank of America Stadium. But primarily these are a combination of City Council working with CRVA and other hospitality leaders in the city to determine what are the best uses of these funds, as they are primarily funded through those sort of occupancy taxes for hotel motel, as well as prepared food and beverage and car rentals.
Great, thank you. Ryan, in your opinion, I'm emphasizing in your opinion, are we anticipating a tax increase? When will we be informed about the results of the budget survey as well?
So we put the information on the budget survey onto our budget website when we give it to council. So that'll happen around the same time that we have the proposed budget in May. And I know you're going to say this is a cop-out, but I would never answer that question ahead of all of the city council engagement that we have. Our last city council workshop is next week, and it talks, the agenda for it, other than our enterprise funds, is to talk pretty extensively about the revaluation process that is undergone with Mecklenburg County and some of the impacts. So that's not a question that staff, it would be irresponsible to answer that question from staff before we've given city council all the information to react to.
Ryan, another question. How will the two new city initiatives, Bridging the Digital Divide and Minority-Owned Businesses, impact the overall budget?
So that's, since we got that in January, since it was added as a priority, we have been working internally to try to come up with options for how we can expand in those areas based on the city council's desire. I will tell you that the digital divide is something that we have used extensive federal stimulus funds over the last couple of years on. And I don't have the stats in front of me, but it has shrunk that digital divide. When I say the digital divide, I mean people that don't have internet access in Charlotte has shrunk over the last couple of years, partially due to the work of some of the programs. And what we'll be working on is what are good strategies that can help ensure that we get internet access to more of our people in Charlotte, specifically individuals in areas with high concentrations of poverty. So we will talk about some recommendations and solutions for that in the budget. As it relates to small business and minority business development, we do have a program called Charlotte Business Inclusion, where we try to ensure that we match up an appropriate amount of city spend with these CBI certified firms. And by appropriate, I mean ensuring that if we have 25% of our firms in a certain area are minority owned, then we should be able to ensure that at least 25% of our spend in that area is on minority owned firms. So last year, CBI did go through, I think it's every 4 years they have to go through this process. It could be more than 4. Which recommends some changes, areas to strengthen. It's good timing because City Council is actually going to talk about CBI in the Economic Development Committee on Monday, if you want to watch the committee. And then they're also going to talk about a new CBI program the following Monday at the Action Review. So there's going to be a lot of discussions over the next week and a half about CBI, which is really one of the initiatives that was mentioned.
Great, thank you. We got a question about how the city invests in workforce development.
Ryan, do you want me to take that one?
Yeah, sorry, please.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So, we have historically invested in individual programs within workforce development or identified programs that we can partner with. We still do some of that, but what we've done over recent years is develop a strategy called Hire Charlotte, which thinks a little bit more comprehensively. And that now we're in the process of trying to fund through some of our federal relief dollars a series of programs that range all the way from apprenticeships to partnering with other organizations in target areas. And so the idea is that it's really more of a strategic, broad approach, working with partners in the workforce development ecosystem and identifying where the biggest opportunities are. Some of that, Ryan, and I'll let you fill in, some of it we do fund through our regular budget process, but historically in recent years, we've done it through the federal relief funds.
Is there a way to build bike lanes faster?
Great question, Tiffany. So let me take that and let me kind of build on some of the information that Ryan shared with you about the way the city of Charlotte was built over time. We were really built as an auto-centric Sunbelt city, and it really wasn't until for bicycle lanes, I would say about the mid-2000s, that we really started to, as a city, shift our philosophy in prioritizing multimodal. And by multimodal, I mean commuting in other ways besides cars. So that would be either as a pedestrian or as a bicycle. And so the ways in which we build bicycle lanes is through capital programs, through private development, and through the North Carolina Department of Transportation through their projects. So with the capital improvement program through the city, there are complete streets. And so when we build new roadways and new intersections, it is that complete streets mindset, which means we include sidewalks and we include bicycle facilities. We also have an ability to go back in and retrofit and resurface when we resurface a roadway. And if there is capacity, if there's extra space in there, to reallocate that to the bicycle lanes. The last way is with a dedicated capital improvement program for bicycles, and that's currently funded at $8 million a bond cycle. And I really want to, just impress upon you, both council and our voters, made that change. Historically, it had been funded at $4 million a bond, and in this last 2022 bond, they increased that to $8 million.
Great. I see another comment. I don't think it's a question. It looks like it's a comment, so I'll just read it verbatim. If the city prioritizes thoroughfares for sidewalks, are we effectively increasing the property value of affluent neighborhoods like Plaza Midwood and Villa Heights? In the past few years, those neighborhoods have gotten bike lanes and other goodies. Thank you for that comment, and we received that and we appreciate it. Feel free if there's any other persons that would like to make a comment. You don't always have to have a question, so that's a good segue to that. So thank you so much for that information. What happens to money that's left over at the end of the year?
One of the things that Ryan had talked about earlier was the fund balance. So city council policy is that we maintain a 16% fund balance at the end of the year, and the funds that are remaining after that go to one-time projects. So primarily we work with with the budget office and others to identify pay-go type capital improvement projects, because we consider it a one-time source of money, because we had it at the one time at the end of the year. We don't want to sort of turn that into an ongoing, in case it was just a one-time increase in revenue that we weren't expecting, or a one-time decrease in revenue. So we really look to match that to a one-time expense and look for opportunities for projects throughout the city.
Yeah, and I would add there is a little bit of a lag. We had a surplus in fiscal year 22, which ended back in June. But because of how long it takes to do the accounting, that's the funds that we will build into what we call pay-go, which Matt just mentioned, in the next budget year. So the current year that we're developing.
How does the city use tax dollars for private investment?
I'll leave that to Tracy.
So in partnering with private investment projects, or what we call public-private partnerships, we have really two sources that we primarily look to use. And the first one is a bucket that has been set aside of our infrastructure dollars to leverage various infrastructure work that is not necessarily just for the benefit of a particular project, but for the larger benefit of the community. So for example, we recently did this with Ballantyne Reimagined, where some of the work that was happening out there served the larger community in relieving congestion around the Johnson Road and 485 interchange. So that's one bucket that we can use. The other one is called a tax increment grant. And what that is sometimes we will have developers that will make a investment in something, again, that we think has a larger public benefit, whether it be a public access parking deck, whether it be a public open space or plaza space, things like that. We will invest in a project for those reasons. The developer will then make the upfront investment, and they will receive a tax reimbursement over the years of new tax that's generated from that project. So it's not necessarily money that we have that we are currently holding for projects like this. It is money that is in tax revenue that is created from the investment of the project, and the new investment of the particular project.
Thank you, Tracy. I also want to bring us back to that thoroughfare in Plaza Midwood comment. Just thinking about it a little bit, I think there is kind of a question in there. The question was, if sidewalk money is spent on thoroughfares, does that prioritize areas like Plaza Midwood? What I would actually say is it's more likely the opposite. If you look at a map of thoroughfares in Charlotte, which we do have, and I think we did publicly provide last year as part of the sidewalk program, you will see thoroughfares without sidewalks all over the city. It's certainly not just in affluent areas. It's actually the opposite. Because of what I mentioned earlier on how Charlotte was developed, you'll actually see more thoroughfares with sidewalks in neighborhoods with sidewalks in South Charlotte, because that is what the developers did when they built it. So I think as far as the sidewalk project goes, it's not, certainly not targeted for affluent neighborhoods to get an advantage. And as far as the criteria that drives the sidewalk list, I'll turn that over to Debbie.
Yeah, absolutely, Ryan. So thank you for expanding on that. The high injury network, so that's locations where we have seen a higher occurrence of serious and fatal injury crashes. That drives a huge portion of the prioritization, as does connection to schools and to greenways and to other transit locations. And so for us, it really is about safety as well as equity in serving the community.
Great. We want to welcome all of our visitors and friends from social media. We have our first social media question. So, within the context of community standards, can the public have a review of what has financially committed to CAP efforts, and will the city achieve its 2030 and 2050 goals? I know that Sarah Hazel, shout out to Sarah Hazel, and her team have been working extremely hard, have achieved successes, but I'm concerned that funding is available to meet those goals.
So one of the challenges with the CAP is, once you create a vehicle policy, once you create a facilities policy, it's something that becomes ingrained in everything we do. So while we might do a project and there's no, the word CAP isn't on it, it has a lot of CAP benefits. So last year, we presented the budget and we got a lot of community feedback that they wanted to understand the investments in CAP more. So that's an area, when we come out with this recommended budget, we do intend to try to itemize things a little bit clearer, not just the direct CAP investments, but some of the indirect CAP investments that we're making in facilities and things of that nature. I would add that one of the most impactful things that we've done for CAP since we started the CAP is the Green Source Advantage program, which was approved by City Council a couple of months ago. It essentially creates a large-scale solar development that the City of Charlotte collaborates with Duke Energy on. And with that new renewable energy, it reduces our gap in the CAP by, I think, around 40%. So it's a big thing when it comes online, and we did get the approvals to have all of the contracts done there. So I certainly hear the question, and I think it brews from what we had presented last year, and we're hoping to make strides in that area this year.
Great. And just for a reference, the CAP is the Strategic Energy Action Plan. That's just an abbreviation that we use. Okay, we have another couple questions from social media, so let's get to those. What is the relationship between the property revaluation process and the tax rate? If the average home price increases, for example, 51%, what is that impact on the tax rate?
Sure. So revaluation is something that the county is legally required to do, and the state requires them to do it a certain way. So the city is not involved in the revaluation process as far as setting the value. That's the county assessor, and there is an appeals process. But the relationship with the tax rate is the city and the county are each required to publish what's called a revenue neutral rate. So what that means is at 34.81 cents, which is our current rate, now the values are worth 50% more. What rate would we set that would lead us to having the same amount of revenue as the year before? Now, it's a little bit more complicated than that because we have to build in an anticipated appeals percentage, and we have to build in what the typical new growth is from year to year. But generally what it gets to is we have to publish a rate based on the way the state says we do it. And then from that rate, city council makes the decision whether they would leave it at that or go higher than that. I will tell you that last time we did revaluation 4 years ago, the revenue neutral rate is what we went with. To be determined on what city council would like to do this year. But basically the way it works in principle is there's a level of growth on your house that will not increase your tax rate. I don't know if it'd be 30% or 40%, but if you're, one thing I can guarantee is if your assessed value went up 50%, your property tax bill will not go up 50%. That's not how it works. But one thing that we're talking about next week as far as impacts is last revaluation, commercial properties went up much more than residential properties. So that was good for homeowners. Unfortunately, this time, residential properties actually went up quite a bit more than commercial properties. So what that means is when the same pie is redistributed, you end up with a little bit more of the burden on residential properties. There is nobody that can change that. That is based on sales data, but it is an unfortunate byproduct of this revaluation.
And Ryan, you mentioned it briefly. Do you want to speak about the budget workshop next week and how this relates to that?
Yeah, so next week at the budget workshop on Thursday at 1:30, the county assessor is going to come and talk to city council about the revaluation process. And then the next presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about impacts by area in the city and run a little bit through what I just said as well.
Great, that's helpful. So feel free to tune into that as well. Just a comment and clarification, so I appreciate this comment. The affluent neighborhood sidewalk property value increase quote was not a comment, it was a question. They asked if something could be done and what are you going to do? So appreciate that, and I think Ryan did have a chance to respond to that question, so thank you for that question and clarification. Another question we received. David Tepper was supposed to build a soccer training center in the Eastland Mall property and then backed out. Did the city give David Tepper money to redevelop the Eastland Mall property? And if yes, when will we get that money back?
I'll take that one, Tiffany. We had done and come to an agreement with Tepper Sports and Entertainment for the Eastland development. However, that agreement was not formalized and no money was actually ever exchanged to David Tepper for that soccer facility.
Great, thank you so much for that clarification.
Oh, and what I would add is that you may ask where'd the money go then. The money stayed in the tourism fund for, or the convention center fund, I should say, for future decisions related to it. And like we mentioned earlier, those are funds restricted by the state to specific things.
Thank you. And it looks like I have Juan Yuvin. I believe your hand was up. Did you still want to speak?
Yes. This is going back, sorry to beat a dead horse, but this is going back to the sidewalks, right? So I know what Ryan said, right? That, like how there's a map, but the public at large doesn't have access to it, or at least I have never seen this map, right? And when I have asked questions over the years about things over the city, like I'm told that there is this list, and I've never been able to get access to the list, even when I have asked city council to give me a copy of this list of the prioritization for sidewalks. Right. So you have to realize that from the optics, from the outside, right, it looks like neighborhoods like Villa Heights, Plaza, Noda, right, they're getting this fancy goodies that appreciate their property values. They're getting sidewalks, they're getting bike lanes, they're getting like all of these things that make the neighborhood even more attractive, while other neighborhoods, my other neighborhoods are not, right? So again, I don't know what you guys know, but I don't know what you guys know. I till today I did not know anything about this thoroughfares, and I have never seen this map. So again, I just have to emphasize that the optics a bit don't look good from the outside.
One, I appreciate that comment, and going to work with Tiffany and the team to post the map, which also shows the priority of the projects that are funded and the priority of the projects that are next in the queue for evaluation. So we'll be able to post that and make that live and available for you and for everyone else to improve the optics as well.
We appreciate your feedback. Thank you so much. One question we got, Ryan mentioned the city has a AAA bond rating. Can you really explain what that actually means?
Thank you, Tiffany. So it is a combination of a lot of factors, one of them being sort of strength of the local economy, being both how many, is the population growing, is the tax base growing with new businesses coming, as well as an evaluation and consideration of sort of strong financial performance, both being year-to-year budgeting and fiscal controls that you have. But it sort of all comes together to sort of put a rating on how likely the city is able to repay its debt obligations going forward. So I think a good way to kind of think about it is kind of like a personal FICO score. It's kind of like a city's credit score on our ability to repay debt or sort of payments over time. And what it means is that when we go to the bond markets to help fund our capital improvement program, that we're able to borrow at the lowest rate possible at the time. And while that is very helpful, I think one of the best things of the AAA is that we're able to access the market even in very difficult times. So we saw this when the pandemic first hit. A lot of local governments didn't know whether or not federal grant or federal money was going to be coming into us, and a lot of people sort of needed money to help continue programs. By having our AAA rating, we were guaranteed that we were going to be able to work with our banking partners and to get that funding. And even in the last couple of weeks, you saw some shocks in the banking market with some of the more smaller regional banks having issues, and that causes a credit sort of crunch where not everyone can maybe get access to the credit that they want to fund, a water sewer infrastructure project or sidewalks and those types of things. But because we're so well managed and have that AAA, we're always going to be able to get those type of funding that we need.
Great, thank you. We have some unofficial results from a poll that we took on Twitter that we just wanted to share with the group while we had a few extra minutes. From the survey of initiatives that reflect some of the greatest needs of the Charlotte community, affordable housing and transit were some of the top. So if there's others that you'd like to put in the chat, we'd love to capture that instant feedback as well. As we look at the time, we're beginning to wrap up. I do have one question that has popped in, and that is, what is the process and timeline for pothole repairs?
Hey, Tiffany, I'd be happy to answer that. So the fastest way to report your pothole is to call 311 or to use the CLT Plus app, and you would enter the street location. And if it's possible to get an address, that helps us to get out there really quickly and efficiently. The process with that is we go out and we immediately inspect it and determine if it's an emergency repair or a non-emergency repair. If it is an emergency repair, we'll do that within 24 hours. If it's a non-emergency repair, we allow ourselves 72 hours to get that fixed.
Great, thank you so much. I think that's all the questions that we have, that we've touched on that I have. I'm going to double check the chat to see if there's any other questions that have just come in or if there's any other hands that are raised. I'm going to do a few seconds of awkward silence. Okay. One more comment just came in. I don't think we're spending enough money in the maintaining of stormwater management. So that's a comment that we just received. So thank you. Any other last comments? Oh, great. Thank you so much. The survey is in the chat. So a link to the survey is in the chat in the WebEx. So you're able to directly access the survey from just in the chat that you're in the WebEx. It's also on our website as well.
All right, so I'd like to thank everyone for spending about an hour with us out of your evening this week. I hope that you have learned something that's beneficial. I hope that you have learned something that makes you want to go back into your community and share the information and get folks to really provide their input for our budget for FY24. Like I said, or like Tiffany said, the link for our survey is in the chat. If you are interested in learning the results of all of our engagement efforts for this fiscal year, you can visit our website. That's charlottenc.gov/budget. There you'll be able to go to the budget development tab, and you'll be able to see our engagement report. You can see some of the recordings from our listening sessions. And if you go to our main page, you'll actually see my email address. So if you have any questions, burning questions that keep you up late at night, feel free to send me an email and I'll get that information to you as soon as possible. So again, thank you so much for your time, and I hope that you guys have a wonderful evening.